At least it should go, is what you're saying. Yeah.
Showing offline now.
And at
Let
least
me
you
come.
identified the.
No, I think it's what happened is generally I wanted to live stream in both Facebook and YouTube. If I do only YouTube, then Zoom is very simple. You just click it. But I put
Yeah,
a,
it says
an
now.
adapter in
Now it
between.
says. हाँ, now it says live.
Yeah,
ठीक
now
है.
it's live.
Now
Yes.
I have, हाँ, but उसमें वो आपका जो picture आ रहा है, background picture आ रहा है, वो mountains का.
Yeah. Now it is live actually.
Okay.
I,
But I can't see our.
no, it is live now. Yes. Yeah, yeah, it will be. It is there. Yes, yes.
It'll come with a lag, is it?
It is coming now. I can see it is live.
Okay, okay. Here on my thing, it's only the. Okay, okay, I got it. Yeah, now I can see it. Right.
Yes, yes, it is there.
It's coming.
So fine. So finally, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Mukesh Sharma. Welcome to U Talks. U Talks is the talks means the technology, arts, life, knowledge, and sports, and it constitutes major part of our life. So I'm very glad to welcome one of our dear friends, S. Parthasarthy, and he is an alumni from IIM Bangalore, 1994 batch, and my senior LM as well. He heads the alumni relationship office in IIM Bangalore since 2016. He's an entrepreneur, he's an author. He founded The Hub, a recruitment services firm in mid-90s, and then founded One Solution, a residential complex web-based solution, merged it with Adion in 2011, co-founded Lab in Motion, a news magazine for entrepreneurs and startups. He wrote Unmet Needs of Entrepreneurship, and now he has released his book 2 weeks ago, How to Discover Customer Value. So Partha, a warm welcome to you on U Talks.
Oh, thank you, Mukesh. Wonderful being here. Thanks for inviting me.
Fantastic. So before I go to, in deep dive of the book, which I personally enjoyed reading, Partha, I think it has got 12 chapters and each chapter is a gem. Of course, before starting this session live, for the audience who will watch it or must be watching online as well, I would like to know that what has been the genesis of this book and the canvas of the book which you planned?
Yeah, Mukesh, actually, this is my second book. The first book was released in 2018. It was titled Unmet Needs of Entrepreneurship. And that particular book revolved around the idea of needs and its impact on various aspects of entrepreneurship. Why entrepreneurs do what they do. Right? And the second book is an extension of ideas in the first book. It is why customers buy your products or services. Where do they find value for them to buy your products or services? What is it that will get them interested in buying or using your service? And the idea of the first book, it's like a chain, the idea of the first book, the genesis is based on, very interestingly, the work that my wife does. My wife is a counselor, and she's been a counselor since the last 12 years, counselor and trainer. She works in the parenting domain.
Oh, fantastic.
Parents and children. She takes workshops on parenting in an area called nonviolent communication. So I observed that the idea of needs was being extensively used by her in the therapeutic domain, and very effective. Basically trying to dig behind the scenes and looking at what causes behavior. And whether it's a consumer, whether it's on a daily life, etc., the understanding of causation of behavior is something that can address multiple issues and bring awareness to the person. So if you look at many of the famous theories when we were in college, even now, whether it's marketing, myopia, or behavioral economics, etc., the roots are in psychology. And that is where the seed of the thought was there, and then it got extended to the first book and then the second book now.
Oh, fantastic. So I think, I have not been able to go through the first book, but I have read this book of yours, and I could relate that you have used some of your past concepts as well when you have mentioned very clearly, and when we talk about. So 12 chapters, Partha, to be very frank, when I was reading the book, it was a nostalgic feeling, as if I am into the IIM Bangalore's class work, where you have a great concepts being introduced, the frameworks being introduced, a lot of examples of the companies who became successful. And I think you have really tested and you have really correlated those successes and created this framework. So, I mean, maybe a tangential question to this: how much time did it take for you to create this VDC and the CAC? And we'll talk about that for our audience.
Yes, actually, let me just provide the full form of VDC. It's Value Discovery Canvas, which is basically the tool that the book actually provides, a framework and a tool for practitioners and entrepreneurs. The seed of these ideas traces back to 2.5 years. You know, it's after my first book, after I wrote my first book itself, I realized that there are a lot of things that can be extended, and so my mind was already working on that. Though I'm not able to fix a time and date, it is an evolution. So then I started jotting down ideas on a piece of papers. That's the way I work, loose sheets of papers, etc. But it's taken 2.5 years. Then you're looking at what kind of research is there in this particular space. How does the way I think, but the way each one works is very different. A researcher typically looks at what is already available and thinks of how to extend certain things. But I work very differently. I basically, if I have an idea, I sit down with a piece of paper. I don't look at what is already there. I just start expanding on the idea because I think that is common sense to me. And then I start looking out for evidence to check out whether this makes sense. And that's how the whole idea started. And maybe 2.5 years would be a reasonable time when it actually got seeded. When it got seeded, but then that time it was raw, and then now I tried to make it slightly more refined.
Right. The pleasure I had in reading the book was not only for the fact that I also come from a similar industry, or we are in corporates, but I think the pleasure I derive the most is because, as you know, that I work with Tech Mahindra in China, and on a daily basis, my work or scope of work involves meeting customers from different industries. So always we are grappling with this issue. I will say this challenge of how do you create value for the customer? How do you discover that value? We often say that let's do a discovery meeting with the customer. And I think in the book, you describe all those factors. One thing which I really liked when you mentioned one of the lines, that core values of a customer and supplier alignment creates a differentiated value. And you gave an example of Honda Super Cub. Maybe you'd just like to, describe a little bit on that.
The Honda Super Cub example was given in a slightly different context, but I know what you're referring to. The Honda Super Cub example is basically, I was looking at it through the lens of context. So when when Honda was actually introduced in the US in the late 1950s, 1959, the US market was dominated by the big bore vehicles, probably 500cc, 750cc, the Harley Davidsons, the Triumphs, and all those kind of bikes. And the US was already well developed. The roadways are well developed, and in the early 20th century, so people preferred going for and the fuel was obviously not very expensive, it lent itself to long drives, etc. But when Honda wanted to introduce bikes, they also by default they did the market research and started with big bore vehicles, and it failed miserably. Because Honda was not known for making big bore vehicles. Meanwhile, in Japan, a 50cc vehicle was very popular. And it was just an accidental serendipity kind of a discovery. And people realized that the 50cc vehicle, they found the Honda persons going in the 50cc vehicle, and that became pretty convenient for short distance rides. Imagine, suppose you're a college student going on a Harley Davidson, it's kind of it's a problem, and also for women riding a Harley Davidson. So it's a bit of a challenge. So the 50cc vehicle, in the context of short rides was much more convenient for a whole segment of people, even for parents who feel comfortable gifting a 50cc vehicle to a teenager rather than a Harley Davidson. So just changing the context from long distance driving to short distance driving and parking, etc. Changed the perception of value for a customer. Here, let me just add how the flip side works. I'm not sure if you noticed that Harley Davidson shut shop in India just hardly less than
Yes.
a year back.
Right.
After 10 years of being in India. Now, if you step back and ask yourself, again, this is related to, if you look at it through the lens of context, you will quickly realize that in the last 10 years, they sold only 27,000 units.
Right.
Okay.
You mentioned in the book
they're
as
all,
well. Yeah.
yes, 750cc vehicles, 4.5 lakhs. That's the price point. Now the context, if you look at the Indian roadways, they're not actually for long distance driving. There are short distance driving, intra-city rides. 90% of the market is
Right.
dominated by the 150cc vehicles. So in the
Mhm.
Indian context and Indian city context and the way our infrastructure is built, Harley Davidson is a misfit.
Mhm. Right.
Yeah. So there are other examples, but I won't go into it. But essentially, that is the context. Now, coming back to your question of aligning supplier values and the customer values, one example that comes to my mind is Tom Shoes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Tom Shoes. So you give an example of I think that's a wonderful example. Yeah.
Yeah, that is more to do with impact, or even Patagonia, for example. Patagonia also, they
Right.
make these outdoor clothing, and
Mhm.
let me take the example of Patagonia. The person who actually founded Patagonia as a rock climber, he's scuba diving, all kinds of stuff. It's an outdoor guy,
Right.
and it's
Right.
not a small company. It's a $1 billion company,
Mhm.
but his company revolves around protection of environment, and he's a social activist, etc. And he walks the
Right.
talk. His whole company walks the talk. And if I, as a customer, if I'm aligned to the way he thinks about his business, when the values
Right.
of the customer and the supplier are aligned, it motivates me to actually purchase those products. So
Right.
Patagonia,
Right.
one of the reasons why people buy the products is not just about the quality of the product, it also how it
Right.
aligns to the way I think about the world.
Mhm. Yeah, I think this is a perfect example. I think it's good that you corrected. The way I was looking at and I was trying to understand was that somewhere I really felt very nice when you said that, because when we try to discover values with the customers, and where the business was created and probably where it works the best is where the supplier and the customer values get aligned. And at the moment I read this line when you mentioned, I was thinking that, okay, if this is true and if this stands true in most of the cases, then what are the values of my company, and or maybe the offering which I'm giving to them, and what is the value they are looking. So if they will have a common landscape, then definitely it will create a much differentiated value. So
Absolutely.
I would also like to probably ask and dwell on this point, which is for my personal interest, that Partha, when you discover a value, somehow I have this feeling that exponentially, or maybe on a certain curve of the value keeps on dropping, because someone else comes and starts delivering a similar value. And you mentioned in your book as well, when you have the multiple offerings to be chosen by a customer, then the supplier relationship and supplier trust and other factors come into play. So just my question to you is that, how does this value discovery canvas would probably, and it is probably iterative process, right, to keep on creating
Absolutely.
that differentiated value. So maybe just
Absolutely.
your views, that does that VDC also covers that aspect?
Absolutely. So the whole VDC is essentially, once you discover what the customer wants, that's not a static. As you
Mhm.
rightly said, it's an iterative process. So even for incremental innovation, now as a company, you're a mature company. You've done a host of
Right.
things, and people have started finding value at this point of time. Value is a
Mhm.
very dynamic concept. What I value today may not be exactly the same thing as what I value tomorrow. At this age, for
Right.
me, I
Right.
value health. Probably at a
Mhm.
younger age, I valued wealth a lot, financial security, companionship, etc. Now I probably value family connections and health much more. So the
Mhm.
value
Mhm.
priority keeps changing. It is the same thing with customers too. So if
Right.
there are others who are going to come and create value in a much more in a way that the consumer is able to relate to. So as a
Mhm.
supplier, you're constantly looking at how do I iterate and keep track of the changing customer preferences and the dynamic
Right.
nature of the customer value. So that
Perfect.
the VDC is not a static thing; it's a dynamic idea. So I call
Right.
this a value storming exercise. So how do you
Okay.
break the citadels of value, so to speak? And how are you
Mhm.
constantly going back to the drawing board to check out if there are other ways to do incremental innovation? Most of the mature businesses to do disruptive innovation is kind of hard because you're already wired
Right.
to a particular way of thinking and infrastructure,
Right.
resources, capabilities. So what
Right.
you're looking at is those incremental tweaks that can
Mhm.
change. I can give you a lot of examples. If you want, I can give you one simple example of
Right.
hair. Hair is the
Yeah.
white goods
Mm.
largest white goods manufacturer in the world, based in China.
Right.
Around 10, 12 years back, they got a phone call from one of the rural markets to the call center saying that the
Mm.
washing machine is getting clogged and getting muddy. And they were
Right.
surprised as to what would be the reason. The sales guy went there, visited them, he realized that they are actually washing vegetables in the washing machine. And
Yeah.
hair is very well known for innovation,
Right.
and
Right.
they're passionate about innovation. And these guys
Right.
came back and they said, let's increase the dia of the drainage pipe.
Right.
And they
Right. Right.
repositioned and they made a new product, repositioned and said, look, you can use it for washing clothes and also for washing your vegetables. And it was an instant hit. Now, this incremental innovation is not too much of, it's just a tweak of the existing product, but it creates huge
Right.
value for the customer.
Right. Right. The perfect actually hire is a great example. And coincidentally, because I work in China for a decade now, they have been our customer as well. And I'll also just add one very small story on that. They gave us a contract of designing their air condition for a very premium luxury market. And what it did was, once you do that, because we have one of our Italian designing company called Pininfarina who does that. When they did that, the air conditioner started looking so great that it doesn't fit into the interior. So the interior starts looking maybe more duller or probably not so good. So there was an exercise done that, okay, can it be integrated to be not just an air condition for your drawing room or living room, but as a complete integrated solution for all your thing. And you actually mentioned, when I read this example of yours, immediately this came to my mind that in one of your, though it is a topic I wanted to take later on, where you mention about that, how do you do the difference between the needs and the values, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And then or the example you mentioned, example of the drill and the hole,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
That how do you are you buying the, are you meeting the needs or the values? So coming just on that point, what is the difference between need creation and value creation?
I think that's a very good question, Mukesh, because these terminologies can be really confusing because a lot of
Right.
words are, and each one interprets it differently. For example, customer benefits, needs, values,
Right.
intent, desirable outcomes. These are all words, and the way you
Right.
actually interpret them. Now, the way I look at needs and values, so needs, you to understand what needs are, you need to go back a little bit in history, to the
Right.
1930s. It was
Right.
essentially, it comes from motivational psychology, and it's
Hmm.
attributed to a person called Henry Murray. And then you had the Maslow's theory of needs. Abraham Maslow, 1943, he wrote a very famous paper. But essentially,
Right.
need as a construct, well, most of the motivational theorists are essentially concerned about causes of human behavior. What causes
Hmm.
people to behave in a certain way? And
Hmm.
again, the distinction between clinical psychologists and coaches, for example, coaches nowadays, you have coaches everywhere. Psychologists
Right.
are constantly looking at how do you get the outliers to become a median, normal.
Right.
And
Hmm.
coaches look at how do you take the medians to exceptional. Okay, that apart, essentially needs as a construct is basically Henry Murray identified a set of ideas which he thought were something
Hmm.
that we were inborn with. And we are
Okay.
constantly trying to meet those needs and adapt to the environment and survive the environment. The need for respect,
Right.
for fun, you have the physiological needs and the growth needs.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, the very fact that we have identified these needs as being very important for our survival and adapting to the environment means they are
Right.
valuable to us as human beings,
Right.
right?
Right.
So what I refer to as inherent value for every need. Every need has inherent value, and that is the
Right.
shared meaning that we all have. If I say we
Hmm.
have need for honesty, all of us have an
Right.
interpretation of honesty, which is perfectly okay. At a very
Hmm.
high level, you can go pick up the dictionary, you know what's the shared meaning of a particular need. But
Right.
what
Right.
happens is you have something called an enhanced value that we attach to a particular need. And that
Right.
is very subjective. And that is something that each one has based on our own memories, our own experiences, etc. That's why value is a very subjective idea. And
Right.
the value, for example, has two basic elements in terms of how you want to look at it. One is the meaning that you attach to something, and number two, how important it is for you at that point in time.
Right. Right.
So that is why I have a phrase in the book that captures these ideas, to me at least, very well. Needs are discovered, values created. People
Right.
don't
Right.
talk
You mentioned
about,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
people don't talk about needs being created. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason
Mm-hmm.
for that. When you talk about, and it may not be very evident,
Mm-hmm.
when you say value creation, basically you're saying that I will change the meaning of something for you.
Right.
Or
Right.
number two, I will change the importance of the thing for you.
Right. Right.
So convenience or health may, all of us know that's a need, but how important is it for you at this point in time? If I'm able to change that importance, I'm creating value for you.
Right. Right. So when you mention, and of course, our standard capture the value framework, you mention, of course, that discover customer value and then create the value and deliver the value. So can't we look at that, discover the customer need and then attributing a customer value to it?
So what happens is then you'll have too many mixture. You'll have a need value. You know? In fact, in the therapeutic domain, right, needs and values are used interchangeably. In fact, needs is used more often. When in the marketing domain, you have needs as an idea. You can look at needs as a, at a higher level than values.
Right.
Need for convenience is, all of us understand what that means. But what is the value that you derive out of what convenience means is where we actually play around with. So
Right.
needs is at a higher level compared to what value is. Value is slightly more specific. We have aggregation of what value means to different people, and we create products for that. So from a marketing point of view, a supplier point of view, I'm constantly looking at value. Needs is at a higher level, value is at a lower level. But that is what I actually operate from.
Okay. Okay. Understood. So I also see that, when I was studying, and the way I looked at it was, Professor D.V.S. Seshadri was our B2B prof, around 12 years, 13 years ago. He taught us a concept of CPV. And you also mentioned somewhere in the book as well, the customer perceived value, right? So one is that discovering the value, then creating the value and delivering. But then over and above, you also have that perceived value as well. And I know that this is a very complex topic because you mentioned beautifully in the book about emotions and so many other things. And it also changes in the context, that the context the customer is looking and the context the supplier is looking is also could be, in a different perception. So how do you think about the CPV part, and how does it correlate with your whole thinking process as well?
See,
or is it like perceive, or is it CPV is too subjective?
Value itself is by default a subjective context. That's what I'm saying. The needs is at a higher level. Value is more perceptual. So let me. There is a definition of value I've written in the book, which actually resonates with me, and which is a very popular definition of what value is, given by Valerie Zeichner. And she talks about value being an assessment of the utility of a product, based on the perception of what is received and what is given. So there are no numbers, there is no economics, there is no nothing. It is a perception. I might value kindness, I might value respect, I might value acceptance. You can't convert everything into a number. Right. At best, you can put a rating scale and say, you can do something like that. But essentially, the point I'm talking is this phrase captures the whole idea of value beautifully for me. Because it's a perception, it's an assessment. Assessment is basically a judgment or evaluation of the utility of a product, and perception of the customer based on what I think I'm receiving and giving. So it maps into what you're referring to, what Professor Seshadri also mentioned, CPV. It just maps into that. It's just a perception. Coming to the context that you mentioned, that is also a very interesting idea. As I'm sitting out here and talking to you, I change the background frame.
Right.
You have a lovely
Right.
beach, right?
Right.
If my original frame, I'm sitting in a room,
Right. Right.
and when you have a background. So what will it do to a viewer when I change the background image?
Mm.
I'm the same
Right.
person. The
Right.
perception and the meaning changes,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
So
True.
what we refer to as context reframing. How do you reframe
Mhm.
context so that something becomes valuable to a customer? I'll give you a simple example, which
Mhm.
I've quoted in my book. Rain. When rain
Mm.
occurs in a water deficient place, say in a town like Rajasthan, it can be
Right.
extremely valuable to a resident there. When rain occurs
Right.
in, say, a flooded area or an area with a lot of rain, say in northeast or Kerala, it can actually be a
Right.
nuisance value. It can be a spoiler. But rain in itself is not good or bad. It is the
Right.
context when rain occurs which will determine the value of rain for a resident in a town.
Absolutely. So I think that's where the need also comes in somewhere at the higher level, which probably derives that part. I also loved reading, and I'm thinking to apply that. Of course, we do in a daily basis. Is your laddering theory, which is the job to be done. Of course, at the core of the model is that job to be done. When you are looking for a hole or you're looking for a drill, so maybe I would request you to probably describe a little bit about the customer action cycle, especially the attribute, consequence, value part of it.
Okay, okay. So essentially, when you're suggesting a framework, you're also looking at other theories, etc., that fit into that kind of thinking. So the
Right, right,
ACV, which is what you're referring to, the attribute consequence value theory, is essentially one of those plugins into what I have actually described, and where
right.
it derives some kind of validation to the way I think about something. So
Mhm.
essentially, the idea there is the ACV is something to do with how do I connect? How do I connect attributes, product
Right,
attributes to consequences are basically outcomes, outcomes
right.
and how that maps into the value that the customer sees in that outcome, and
Mhm.
how the customer links the attribute to the value.
Right, right,
There's a
right,
product attribute, there's an outcome, there's a value. And how does a customer attach by default the attributes of a product to the value that it derive out of that thing? That is basically
right.
the ACE theory. The customer action cycle basically looks at, the challenge for me was the two questions that I wanted to address. Where does customer value reside and how to find it? So
Right,
I looked
right,
at where do I look for this, where do I look for value,
right.
and for me, the starting point was looking at customer action, because customer
Mhm. Mhm.
action is what gets manifested. For example, now here I just wanted to clarify something very basic. The difference between behavior and action.
Right,
Behavior is an aggregator of actions. For example, when you say someone is being rude, you're essentially you're talking about someone having a facial expression or gesticulation or the words that you're using, or
right,
something about the demeanor of the person that you categorize as being rude. So
right, right.
behaviors are basically aggregation of actions. And if you want
Mhm.
insights into something, you need to look at actions of customers. So
Right.
if I want to look at value, I will look at any
Mhm.
customer action. So the next question you want to ask is, are customer actions the same across products or services or across domains? Are they
Mhm.
agnostic? So what I
Right.
did with the customer action cycle is I have taken any customer action
Mhm.
and broken it down to its basic constituents.
Right.
So the
Mhm.
basic constituent, if you look at a cycle, why you call it a cycle is what does a
Right.
customer do? A customer takes a tool. A tool is a product or a service which has been
Right.
supplied by someone, and I execute certain actions. And when I
Mhm.
execute certain actions, it gives me certain outcomes. The outcomes can be desirable outcomes, maybe undesirable outcomes, but there are outcomes for a particular action. And those
Right.
outcomes have impact.
Right. Right.
And then it's an iterative loop. When the impact
Right.
output comes out, right, then I can check out if it's aligned to what I want. And all of this happens in a particular context. All
Right.
action happens in a
Mhm.
particular context. So that is a
Right.
customer action cycle. And I
Mhm.
call these 7 points value nodes. They are represented
Yeah.
by nouns. And then I
Right.
introduced the idea of value catalysts. Value
Right.
catalysts are basically influencers, ideas that can influence people to buy your product or use your product. So you might have
Right.
the money to buy a car, it's very useful, it meets your needs, and yet you may not buy a car. And the question is
Right. Right.
why? Why?
Mhm.
So that is where the role of catalysts become very important. Catalysts are, I've identified 5 catalysts. Are you motivated enough to buy your product or service? Or what
Right.
motivates customers to buy or use your product? So
Right.
motivation, beliefs and expectations. Expectations are a priori beliefs, or
Mhm.
skills,
Mhm.
resources, or emotions. So
Right.
when these 5 components will actually influence a purchase behavior.
Right. I think I was just coming to that as well. You just mentioned that the value nodes and the catalyst. In fact, it has been a wonderful read because the way you have written the book, you have used, of course, the theory and the frameworks, the practical examples. So I think this book can actually serve as a good elective as well. I think because this actually contains a lot of theoretical concepts which even the B school students will love to read, imbibe, and even practitioners like us who are anyway doing day-to-day drilling work already, and it actually sets you thinking, take 2 steps back and say, hey, can I apply this? So I was particularly, after reading the book, I was thinking that I will do a workshop internally with our teams to see, we are into the B2B services, that how do you do that customer action cycle and try to figure out the different value nodes and see what are those catalyzers. So I think it is a really wonderful thing to do. And then you describe the value discovery pyramid for that. The example of chick shampoo, maybe you just like to throw a small spotlight on this. How does the value node or the value catalyst is
Sure.
identified?
Sure. The chick shampoo was actually, if I'm trying to quickly remember, it was, illustrated as an example of the customer node,
Right. Right.
who's your customer? Who exactly is your customer? And are you barking up the wrong tree? So more often than not, you have people coming back and saying, look, the customer doesn't understand me, and doesn't know the value of what I'm providing. Maybe you're barking up the wrong
Right.
tree. Right. So the chick shampoo was introduced in 1989 by Kevin Care in India,
Mhm.
and it was the first product to be introduced in shampoo to be introduced in sachets in the world, which is
Mhm.
amazing for an Indian company. And Ranganathan introduced he was operating out a small, 100 square feet kind of a garage, a small
Right.
place. And the interesting part is, the large players like P&G and Levers, etc., had their shampoos being distributed in larger towns and cities through
Mhm.
bottles and plastic bottles and glass bottles. And the rural markets were out of the radar, or what I refer to as
Right.
out of frame. Out of frame. So I introduced
Mhm.
the idea
Out of
of
frame.
out of frame and in frame customers. In any
Yes.
business, there are outliers who could be
Mm.
converted with a little bit of nudge into using
Mhm.
your product or a service, but there is something that is stopping them. Maybe they are not early adopters, or maybe there
Mm.
is something else that stops them from actually using or trying the product. So who
Right.
exactly are out of frame customers? So in the context of chick shampoo, the promoter realized that there was a market, the rural
Mm.
market, which was out of frame, out of the
Mm.
radar for existing players. And he got into that particular space trying to understand the needs of the customers there. So the question that
Right.
I was asking is, who are your out of frame customers who could be converted into an in frame customers? And
Right.
I've given some kind of categorization of who are these out of frame customers for any business.
Mhm. Yeah. Right. I think it's a very wonderful example because it sets you thinking that while you may have already a product, and how do you expand the market and try to reach to maybe out of the frame customers, which the beautifully you used example. I will just quote one line which I loved the most when I was reading is, some customers seek outcomes because there is something to gain, and there are others who seek the same outcome to avoid some pain. So when we meet customers, so of course you discover their pain points to set them some gains, but from your perspective, when there are customers who are expecting gains or who are really trying to solve their pains, of course gain is also certain kind of a solving pain somewhere, but then how do you feel that where does the value reside the more actually? Who are trying to look for gain or pain solving?
This is a very interesting conversation. I must compliment you for being so, in terms of observation, though you have 1.5 days to read the book, you have picked up those exact phrases, which probably even I would have probably, it'll have triggered my thinking. So essentially this pains or gains comes from motivational theory. I'm not
Right.
sure how many
Okay.
people are going to connect to it, but I will let you know
Yeah.
that, it comes from avoidance and approach theories of motivation. And if you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the bottom needs are deficiency, the other ones are growth.
Right.
Essentially, there are people who want something for themselves because they actually want it. There are, even in customers, that's what you call gains. There are some people who want something because they want to avoid something. So both of them
Okay.
have the same target, but their
Mm-hmm.
focus, Nazariya, is somewhere else, right?
Right.
So let me
Right.
give you a quick example, as an anecdotal example. If you're going for a vacation with your family,
Mm-hmm.
there are some people who go for a vacation because they want to explore places, they want to have fun, they want to meet new people, they want to experience new cultures, etc. And there are some people who go there to avoid stress in the office,
Right.
avoid
Right.
gunjet at home, fights at home that taken me to an office
Right.
for a holiday, or you just want to connect to the family members because you feel totally disconnected with the family members and you've been busy in the office. So going for the vacation is still the same for both of them. But there is
Right.
one
Right.
who they motivate, what we refer to as motivation orientation. Right? There are some
Right.
who are
Right. Right.
motivated because this is very, very similar to, I'm just connecting this to the idea of the gains and pains basically is from that particular window, those lenses. So you want
Right.
something because you want a gain, you want something because you want to avoid some pain. Now, which is better, which is worse? There is nothing like worse or better. For some
Right.
customers, they want to gain something and move
Mm-hmm.
forward quickly. There are some who are actually focused on the pains. They want to avoid the pain area and they want something else. And that actually is the orientation of the customers. How is the DNA of the customer oriented? If you look
Right. Right.
at a very high level, suppose you have a high growth, there are companies that grow extremely fast. Those
Right.
companies, by nature, the DNA is wired towards growth and gains.
Right. Right.
Once you start focusing on pains, you're focusing too much on problems.
Right.
And
Right.
when you think of the word problem itself, it can be overwhelming for some people
Right. Right.
because you're
Right.
focused on problems and you're being a bit conservative. But companies, that could be some kind of a heuristic, but I'm just putting it on the table. But companies that are growing very fast can't be analyzing so much on what are the pains and what are the gains. You just need to go ahead and just do things fast.
Right. Right.
And if there
Absolutely.
is a problem, I will face it.
Right. Right.
I will face
I
the,
think, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would just say mention here because I come from IT industry and it's an outsourcing industry, and I just Partha, maybe a point for you to actually just analyze later on to touch upon is that when we work with customers who are like multinational companies who have a very structured process, so they will work with us to get gains, and those engagements are sustainable. They see us more as a supply chain partners. They will invest in their supply chain and make sure that they keep on getting consistent gains. But the people who outsource just to solve the pain, they are very transactional, and they don't see much value. So I don't know. I mean, the assessment which I was making when I was reading this is that if you are probably trying to satisfy and for solve the pain, maybe the value will fuse out after some time. I don't know. I mean, this could be wrong as well. But then where you're working the gain side, it may continue to deliver more.
Yeah, but as I said again, the motivation orientation even for companies, ultimately companies are made up of people, and they have a
Right,
specific
right.
DNA. Maybe different. Let me give you some examples of how pain, solving pains can also be can be very beneficial for people. There are some
Right.
professions that are actually you can be extremely successful by focusing on problems and on pains. Lawyers,
Right.
lawyers are constantly looking out for what are the loopholes that you can find in law,
Right,
and
right.
auditors, accountants are constantly, they're wired to look at the problems that could potentially get you into trouble. right?
Right.
They're
Right.
looking
Right.
for
Right.
entries which are not okay. Even in your own industry, software programmers are looking for bugs, bug
Right.
fixing.
Right. Right.
So there are,
Right.
and you can be very successful at that, testing,
Mhm, mhm.
etc. So there are certain professions where you can make a great livelihood by just focusing on the pains and problems. But
Right. Right.
entrepreneurs usually are wired towards what I have noticed is they're wired towards what I can gain and how I can move fast. Because if you want to
Right.
move fast, you need to be focused on what you can gain. This is one
Right.
of the things that I would like to probably infer from what I have seen. Entrepreneurs are
Right.
wired slightly differently. For example, they're more gain oriented, and there are
Right.
certain professions in certain places where you want to be slightly more sure, conservative, where you want to ensure that everything is perfect and you don't have a problem before you move forward.
Right. 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 Yeah, absolutely. I think this is really, you're right. It really set me thinking that, of course, pain is definitely one area where you're talking about their needs and what values can come up. Very, very complex topic. It's more on the philosophical and sometimes psychological sides. So as you mentioned, the motivational theory, probably I go back a little bit, read about it, just to set my my thinking more clear. Other thing which I liked the most, as we discussed, was the context side. I think you beautifully described, and I think those of the people who are watching, and if I also caption that they must look at, I must recommend this, the framework of the 2 by 2 matrix. I'm personally a very big fan of 2 by 2 matrix because it really gives you a very, very clear understanding of, in a very simplified way. So you're external and internal to the customer and the ability to influence. And you have put those Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, the quarters, right? And I love the way you put the India Post, the new education policy, and the Zoom on which we're interacting as into something which is external, but then the ability to influence was lower actually. But then how did it really came up? And I think, but I would like to ask you some example on the internal to the customer side, especially the decathlon example.
Yeah.
The ability to influence is high and more internal to the customer, sometimes very difficult to recognize and find out the internal things.
You're absolutely right. See, when you talk about context, let me clarify. Context are basically settings in which something happens. Okay.
Right.
Now,
Right.
usually when we talk about context, we are constantly looking at external context, something that is
Mhm.
outside of us. Basically,
Right.
you look at a situational context, the time of the day, duration,
Right.
you events and festival, etc., right? Or you look at
Right.
the regulatory framework, which is what I call systemic, which is again outside of us. Some GST
Mhm.
rule changes. Is your product or service aligned to the new changes? Is
Mhm.
you move into another country? Is your product or service aligned to the regulatory framework there? There's an
Right.
NEP policy. What can I do with this that something that affects all the players in the market, and how do you actually
Right.
maneuver and adapt yourself? But there are
Right.
certain contexts where I introduce this idea of mental settings, that is
Mhm.
internal
Mhm.
to a customer. So context
Right.
is not just external, it's also internal. So that is where I
Right.
think what you're referring to is internal context. There are two types. One is the
Right.
biological context, which I refer to, and another one is the mental context. Mental
Right.
context is values, purpose,
Mhm.
beliefs, needs, etc. Are the shared context in which we can operate. Let me give you a quick
Mhm.
example before you
Right.
move to decathlon. Suppose you as a family, you go to, say, in Bangalore, we have this film city, or some place where you go with the family and have a great time. Now
Right.
the need that is being met is for fun and entertainment, and a lot of
Right.
people who congregate there to such places is basically to meet the same need. So the
Right.
needs itself is a context, the mental context, which ensures that people who have very homogeneous kind of mental settings
Mhm.
congregate to consume a product or a service.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
if you look at the sport, decathlon is a sports context. So there are
Mhm.
people who think very similarly about health and fitness, etc. They might adopt to certain practice. One of the things that you want to do is indulge in
Mhm.
sports activities and physical
Mhm.
kinesthetic activities. So
Right.
there are businesses that are actually that are formed around context. So
Mhm.
decathlon is basically into sports
Right.
gears, equipments, etc., that they provide for people who think that health, fitness, and sports is a very important component of life. right?
Right.
So the
Right.
thinking provides a mental setting
Mhm.
in which people are going to buy your product or service. So the whole business is centered around that mental setting, internal mental setting. And you
Right.
find that all you just look around, you'll find a lot of businesses that are actually centered around the settings.
Right.
If wedding planners, for example,
Right. Right.
wedding is just like any other event, but there are some people who take wedding as an occasion, and that is worth being explored as a separate area to focus upon, because as an event that is very important to a customer. So the
Right.
business revolves around wedding and wedding planning. And
Mhm.
and you have corporate gifting, that is also around corporate gifting is gifting,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
But you focus on corporate gifting because that is the context that you want to focus on.
Right.
So yeah.
I think this is really good. I was just wondering, Partha, when I was is looking at this and categorization of all the examples there, if as an entrepreneur, I think you yourself an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, uh, if you want to advise some entrepreneurs, which quadrant will have a higher success chance, or probably from which quadrant the next unicorn can come up, or which quadrant the most profitable enterprises can come up? Have you thought about them sometime? Just giving a guess.
Yeah, I see the first quadrant is any marketer is constantly suppliers looking at how can I influence context, right?
Right,
What are the
right, right,
contexts that are in my control? So I'd say Q1. I mean, obviously, someone who's listening right now wouldn't know what is a Q1, Q2. But essentially, what I'm
right, right,
saying is the quadrant where you have the highest scope of influence,
right.
uh, and that is external to you, is
Hmm.
something that you would have, a lot of levers for influencing and discovering something interesting there. So that I would
Right.
assume is the area that someone would be looking at. The
Okay.
other area is an internal context, but that is pretty hard. That's easier in terms
Hmm.
of categorization, but that's not really easy, because that
Hmm.
talks about changing mental settings, changing beliefs, changing values. That takes a lot of time, effort, and resources. But if
Right.
Q1 is where
Hmm.
probably someone would like to focus on. Q2 is also important. Q2 is external, anything that is external, but I could still adapt myself to the external environment. uh, uh, it could be systemic, but I could still be the first mover advantage. There's an NEP policy that's been named, or I've given
Right.
the example of Chingari,
Right.
right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
When
Yeah.
TikTok was banned, that has nothing to do with
Right.
Chingari, but the external
Right.
context gave it a big fillip, right?
Right.
The
Right. Hmm.
India Post became extremely valuable to e-commerce companies.
Right.
Nothing to do with India Post. So
Right.
they
Right. Right.
they just had the distribution depth and width, right? But the
Right.
context
Right.
in which they were operating and how e-commerce evolved in India provided an opportunity for India Post to expand its footprint.
Right. Right. Right.
So
Absolutely.
how
I
do
think,
you?
yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So
Go ahead.
how with the changing circumstances and context, which can be systemic in nature, how can
Right.
I look at my own strengths and adapt and provide value in the changed context? So Q1,
Mhm.
Q2 would be something I would be constantly looking at.
Right, right. And also, for example, nowadays new data laws have come in, especially in China, these new cybersecurity data laws and those things are coming, which is creating a legal battle between countries to countries. So I was wondering that probably new firms on cybersecurities, and you have even seen the GDPRs and all those new data laws, right? So there are a lot of challenges being emerged that you can't cross over the data cross border. So I was wondering that probably ability to influence is much lower. So there could be
Yeah,
new startups or new entrepreneurs probably coming in that area to probably create more value for the customers.
absolutely, absolutely. That's an
Right, right,
opportunity, actually.
right, right. And as you know, nowadays the T20 World Cup is going on. I was so pleased to read one of the great examples, which because cricket is something close to everyone's heart in India, and you mentioned in the action part, the
Ashwin.
CAC, the action, the
Ashwin.
Ashwin chunking down the bowling action,
Yeah.
and in that way that doing those marginal changes, those marginal improvements, and you have given a great process for this. So I was remembering that when I worked in a Japanese company. Kaizen is something like small improvements, right? And you really break down the actions and take everything as a Six Sigma kind of approach, and
Yeah.
work it. So that was a wonderful example I had anyway. You just want to comment on that because that was really a good detailed example in the book.
Yes, that in fact one of the value nodes is action. So
Action,
basically,
yes.
what I'm saying is, look at what are the different kinds of actions that a customer basically goes through before while using a product. And actions can be multiple. One is before I
Right.
purchase or use your product, while I'm using a product, and post using a product. What are the different kinds of actions that the customer goes through? Are there
Right.
gaps in these particular spaces that I can actually fill up? Are there some challenges the customer is actually facing? And I
Right.
might
Right.
get some great insights.
Mhm.
The example that you're quoting is basically I took from sports. Ashwin, not too many people perhaps know that he
Yeah.
changed his action, and there's a lot of technique and science behind it, and
Right.
how he actually adapted himself and the Sodaka ball, etc. And
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
science, a lot of research that has gone into it. Maybe perhaps someone should, people who are interested should go to buy the book and see how chunking down those actions, something as
Yes.
simple as spin bowling.
Right.
At the outset, we just say spin bowling, but what goes into it, if you want to know, you need to read that example. You know,
Right. Right.
and
So I
and
think
there are
yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. Go
there
ahead.
are a
Yeah.
couple of examples also I given. Simple things like the roti roti matic is an
Right.
example that
Automatic.
I
Yes.
given.
Yes. Right. Right.
So
Right.
just by observing what Indian woman goes through while making rotis in the typical kitchen, so someone
Right.
got ideas into making a fully automatic machine. Value creation is another subject. It's depends on resources, capabilities, skills that you have, etc. But just identifying the problem in itself came from just observing people actually making rotis, and
Right.
looking at how I can make it much easier for them. So
Mhm.
from starting from kneading and mixing, the flour and the oil and the water, and how do you
Mhm.
knead it? How do you make circular rotis? And how post making rotis? How do I clean up? How
Right.
do
Right.
I? What about safety related issues using fire versus non-fire? So the roti matic basically chunked down everything, and then
Right.
started trying to solve each of these problems differently.
Right, right. Absolutely. That was a wonderful example. Actually, the moment I read that, I was looking that from where I can buy that now, especially in China. Because
Yeah.
I know that when I make some time, to help my wife, I never make a round one because I know I can't. So I actually rely on making a triangle one because it's easy to spread it around and make it more like a paratha style. But
Yeah.
yeah, that is something really, very, very important. And especially in India, the daughter-in-law has a great task to probably make the first roti round. Otherwise, the mother-in-law may not give good marks.
True,
But I
true,
think,
true.
Partha, you covered a lot of examples. I think I can sell the Apple iPod, the Oppo, of course, the Ashwin one, the Whitehead Junior, Axe, Fair and Lovely. I was, see, a decade away from India. Of course, we know and notice all these things. But as a person staying probably outside, it was a lovely read for me because it was really covering a lot of examples. And of course, the catalyst part you covered and the frog. I think maybe you just like to, I'm not asking you spoilers of the book, but maybe a quick on the frog one, which I loved
No,
the
no,
most.
not an issue. See, basically, frog comes under the value catalyst that they call motivation. So,
Right.
what I have noticed is there are people. For example, I've seen women. I'm here taking an example of women. It can also apply to men who are
Mm-hmm.
above 45 and who know that a car is important for them, and it gives them a lot of flexibility. They have the affordability. Money is not a problem, but they still
Right.
don't buy it. And
Mm-hmm.
there
Mm-hmm.
it might revolve around beliefs. It may be around skills, beliefs about skills, beliefs about outcomes, beliefs about expectations, etc. Even in
Mm-hmm.
motivation, sometimes you're not motivated to actually use a product or a service for various reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Again, motivation is a big subject, but I'll just give you quickly in terms of what Frog is actually all about. It's a
Right.
mnemonic that says, is your customer having fun using your product? Is it an
I
enjoyable
love.
experience for them? R is
Right.
result, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Is it, what are the tangible results? What are the intangible results? And
Mm-hmm.
G is for goals. Whose goals are you meeting? Are you meeting the customer's goals? Are you meeting your
Right.
own goals? Are you obsessed with only I, me, myself, or are you really truly concerned about the customer? And O is for ownership. O is for ownership. How much of your product or service the customer thinks he or she owns, and that actually falls into a space of personalization or customization. That's why a lot of diverse set of businesses, if you look around you, from the chip making business to paints business, they look at personalization and customization because it gives a sense of ownership to a customer, and customer is very empowered. He has a sense of ownership, and that can be really, really motivating because I have control over what I do. I've given an example of pick your trail, where you can plan your whole international travel online for yourself. And that's very, very empowering. So from fun, what are the results? Intangible, tangible. O is for ownership. G is whose goals are you meeting? So if whenever you think you're doing everything right, but something is not working, step back and ask yourself the frog and see if the customer is really enjoying what you actually have to offer.
That is what actually I'm going to subscribe this to my team. Actually, look at the frog first. But coming to the final part, is the VDC, where you describe in the last chapter that this can be applicable for startups, the early startups, early stage ones, the ventures, the mature businesses like companies like us, we work, and the B school students as well. I think this VDC is something, and I have seen the table and the whole process part of it, and of course read the examples. Once this Rotimatic machine and the after school one, I'll try to apply it to some part of it. So now what is the plan after this? How you're trying to now utilize these books, great work, and how you're thinking to take it ahead? What are your plans in this?
I think that's a very interesting question. And obviously book has to feed into something bigger. The book is something that gives you some kind of a framework. So what I'm working on right now, Mukesh, is I'm working on an online tool. So I'm also working on an online course, which should self-service. People can just go and, one is a book and one is a course. And which the course will come with an online tool where you can actually, for your own circumstances, you can actually develop your own canvas. And you can also see the canvases prepared by others. I'm also looking at how this can dovetail into an hybrid model, which I've been just talking to people. I'm still early stages. And where you have an online tool, people can plug into an online tool and develop for themselves and think through those questions, etc. And also do an offline session where you do a hand holding. I'm not an expert in every domain. I can't be. So basically, the whole idea is to trigger people to think how, like what you're saying, how you can apply some of these ideas to your own circumstances and see if that something opens up for you. So do value storming exercises, through a facilitation process where people are able to think through these value nodes and through a team exercise. I'd like to believe the VDC creation can help the idea, culture of innovation, collaboration and creativity with an organization from a customer value discovery process point of view.
Right.
So I call it a value storming exercise. So the idea is to see how you can do offline sessions and workshops and facilitate the process of thinking through all these things. And the value discovery canvas, actually, just to quickly, because you mentioned that, I have described a 5-stage discovery process. So one is observations of what is, and there's a very important idea which we have missed in this, is something called value criteria.
Value criteria, yes, yeah.
It can easily get missed in the book. The value criteria is the how to find customer value. One is where to find, that are nodes and catalysts, and how to find it is you need to ask the right questions, and that's where value criteria comes in. So with the help of value criteria and value nodes and value catalysts, you can actually build the value discovery canvas. Value discovery canvas looks at what is observations, then you explore what can be, you explore possibilities, what can be, how else, what else, etc. And then you prioritize, which is, the importance of what you think the customers actually values right now. And
Right,
this, once you discover what is it, then the next stage is value creation,
right, right,
which I
right.
don't get into. The book limits itself to just value discovery.
Right, right. I think you mentioned the important point is online tool and where people can see not only their VDCs but other VDCs. I think that will be very good. One thing which I also noticed, probably I don't know whether it can extend or expand into this, is that sometime people who are sitting outside India, or and when they want to invest, sometimes we sitting outside India, we feel that hey, we want to invest into Indian startups, and we don't know how to judge that in which one you do invest. I think this VDC or an applicability or rating these startups, that what model they have and what kind of a VDC score, I don't know if that VDC score or something can come up at some stage, can at least give an investment guide. I mean, it's just like a brainstorming exercise, that could it turn out to be an investment guide for investors to invest into some startups.
I think that's a very interesting point. You must have heard of, the business model canvas, the lean canvas,
Right,
and then the
right,
value proposition design. So if you look at the
right,
business model canvas, one of the subset is what is called the value proposition canvas. Now,
right,
this canvas terminology can be confusing to a lot of people, but essentially the value discovery canvas is a subset of a business model. So
right,
this is the
right.
first stage of understanding what you're actually trying to solve. And
Mhm.
once you get that, then the business model has to be built around this.
Right, right.
So
Mhm.
in terms of, how do you create value? How do you deliver it? What are your plans to build customer relationship and sustain value? How do you capture value? What is the economics and, cost structures, revenue, etc. But this can fit into a business model. It can feed
Right,
into a
right.
business model. So if someone has to make a presentation to anyone, maybe to a customer or to a potential investor,
Mhm.
the VDC can provide a very structured way of presenting an idea to
Right,
in much more condensed way. Obviously, people might not have the time to go through everything, but it
right,
condenses various thoughts and brings some clarity to the way you want to approach a problem.
right, right. I think wonderful. I think this, I feel that, Partha, this book can further be expanded into multiple areas, in theoretical aspect as well, because each chapter can have a lot of references, a lot of research work can be done, because this topic is so huge and complex, and also includes objectivity and subjectivity both.
Absolutely true. That's why I said that it also one of the target audience is researchers, because a
Right.
researcher can take one of these threads
Mhm.
and can go deep into it and look
Right.
for data points, look for evidences, look for some other way of looking at something.
Mhm.
uh, each of these nodes, catalysts, etc., can actually lend itself to research.
Right, right. I think I must thank Pata for your time here. But before we wrap up, I want to ask that what is your favorite chapter in this book, or the where you really felt that it came very naturally? You didn't take much of the effort, and you came it so hard. And there could be another one where you really made an efforts.
uh, the, you know Most of these ideas, I told you, it's taken 2.5 years. So it's an
Right.
evolutionary process. I'm not able to fix a time and date when something had actually occurred to me first.
Yeah.
And then many interesting, the whole idea of the value discovery pyramid, and
Yeah.
how do you start off from a value node, value catalyst, and drill it down and have a 5-stage discovery process and
Right.
introduction of certain. The customer action cycle in itself is very it's simple, but I
Hmm.
think I like it. Maybe because I've written it, I don't know, but I thought it was simple, elegant, and at the end of the day, it has a logic to it. The unit of
Right.
analysis is action, and how do you chunk down and look at the constituents of any action? So remember, when you're analyzing action, when you're analyzing an idea, it has to be usually agnostic of
Right.
domains. It
Right.
has to be agnostic of products or services. So that is one. The customer action cycle itself is very interesting. I was quite happy with it. The another interesting part I thought was the context part. Because
Context part.
usually we are limited by the way we actually think.
Right. Right.
We actually we are defined by the cocoon that we weave in the way we think. and we usually attribute external context to the as settings for something, for behavior and action. So by extending that logic to look at internal settings, both biology is also very interesting. If you've seen those examples, I
Yes.
found that part very interesting.
Right.
As how companies focus on restoring. We don't have any control on a biology or on a neurology, the way we are wired, the five senses, and how do you, there are companies that are constantly looking at extending our sensory capabilities or restoring or maintaining. And that itself is a great business opportunity. The
Absolutely. I think
stethoscopes, the microscopes, stethoscopes, the X-ray machines, the telescopes, etc., extend our capabilities, and human beings are always curious. So if people want to extend capabilities, there are opportunities in the biological settings on which you don't have any control. Right. So that also was very interesting. So it threw up a lot of interesting ideas. So the context is another chapter which I personally liked writing.
I think that truly, I think I did, because of lack of time today. We can keep on talking for another hour. But the Jaipur, the Jaipur food example which was used there was lovely actually. In fact, while reading the book, I was looking at these virtual reality and mixed reality. These are the new technology which are now coming up, which are stretching the imaginations of the customers and as users. So there could be, definitely a lot of things which can be applied to. But thanks, Partha. I know that this. Thanks for taking the time. I know this book is released. You also had a discussion yesterday at some platform. So I hope that the book does very well, and I'm sure it will do, because it contains a great, you can say, a combination of theory and practice. So it will not only appeal the researchers and students and the professors and academicians, but also people like us who are in the practice and in the corporate life. So I think it is very well written, and I must say you must promote it and probably convert it to an elective. And also, best wishes for your online tool. Online tool will probably.
Thank you so much.
And you can probably write the next book on investment guides for NRIs who are looking to invest in the startups.
No, thanks, Mukesh. It's been a pleasure actually, doing this talk with you. It's probably one of the first talks I'm getting into post publishing the book. So it was a wonderful conversation, and I must really compliment you. Given the 1.5 days of reading or 2 days of reading time, whatever it is. I mean, I don't know how you squeezed in to go through it. The kind of questions that you actually ask are very nuanced, and that can come only from someone who understands the subject and goes a bit deep into it. And the kind of questions, what you picked up from that, the phrases that you picked up, I'm so happy that you are able to, as an author, it gives me so much immense pleasure just talking to someone who has actually digged out those things, and for me, that's exactly what I'm looking for. I'm looking for people who can dig out those nuggets somewhere and try to see how they can apply it to their own circumstances. So personally, I'm absolutely thrilled to have this conversation.
I'm too, but really, I mean, it gave me good opportunity to relearn few things. I'm going to apply that, and this conversation will not stop here. Probably I'll invite you for a more deeper discussion with some of the team members as well at some time. And thanks a lot. Have a good Sunday ahead, and best wishes for the book. And thanks a lot for coming and spending your time here.
Hey, thanks, Mukesh. Thanks for your time too. It's been a pleasure being with you.
Thank you very much. So I'll stop the broadcast here, and thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Bye.